Hi, guess I really should mention that when I say I stutter during the introduction, I genuinely mean I stutter. But I will say, if you want a quick time map of everything, here it is. That's all. Thank you. Enjoy the video. Alright, so just real quick. Literally everything I found for this video is just purely what works best for me. It may not work best for you, so therefore, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I do pause, I do stutter, and I apologise if that actually happens. It will happen. But, I will just say, if you find this helpful, great. If you don't, that is fine. I will have a link to everything that I researched for this in some way or another in this video, so please, do your own research and don't feel pressured by me. Don't. Just don't. Personal grievances aside, you can't actually take anything from ChatGPT and call it yours. It will always belong to the AI generator. Same goes with anything AI generated related. You can't actually own anything that it does. You either have to credit it, or you have to fight for the rights for it, and you can't really fight for the rights for an automated machine. So, just my personal recommendation with it, don't use it, and just make sure everything comes out of your own noggin. Okay? Honestly, yeah, this one's kind of a complex one. Right, so inspiration is kind of a strange thing, because you're basically looking at it like, what can you best describe? And yeah, I ain't gonna be around the bush. This is actually where most inspiration comes from. Like, yeah, you're gonna have people who are inspired by the people around them. So for example, Percy Jackson author Rick Riordan was inspired by his son Haley Riordan, who had ADHD and dyslexia. You know, just like every single demigod in the Percy Jackson series. It's one of those things, and it's also like, some get them from vivid dreams, others from a lightning strike. There's so much ways to get, many ways to get inspiration, it's unreal. Like, for example, my own story that I did one called Ignoble, Beyond the Veil. I never finished it, but I did put it up on Wattpad. And effectively, my inspiration for that was very much like what I've been accustomed to in my entire life. So with that, I used that and decided to write a story about it. I do intend to go back and finish it. I might even just rewrite it personally. But that's pretty much the general gist of inspiration. It can either be something completely random that just happens to you, or it's just the set circumstances that you're in. It really doesn't matter. Inspiration happens to all of us differently. But just remember, you're not going to write a story about a candle with a candle right in front of you. You follow me? Now for something a bit more important, research. Literally, this is everything that every single college student and university student fears. Research. It's actually a writer's best friend, in my opinion. Let me explain. So basically with research, it's important that you understand what your subject matter is about. So for example, going back to me again, when I was writing Ignoble, I had to look into a lot of Arthurian mythology. I had to look into English folklore. Rick Riordan looks into multiple different facets of mythology. Greek, Roman, Norse, and Egyptian, for example. And others tend to use popular monsters and narrative, and even games like Dungeons and Dragons for their referencing. Anyway, so for the four biggest things that I can actually take away when it comes down to reading: organization, systemization, reading a lot, other forms of narrative media, and talking to people. I'll elaborate on talking to people a lot more in detail, but let me go over the first bit first. So, for example, with organization systemization, you need to have some sort of order to what you're researching. this can be labeling documents, like numbering them in the order that you have it set, and also having specific notebooks. For example, a Pukapad that you have different tabs that you can use it for, along with notebooks that you can just put anything and just have that one be set for that. Along with that, online you can just use your computer, but it's also good to keep in mind you can also have cloud storage like OneDrive and Google Docs, or you can have an external hard drive. They can be up to 2 terabytes, they are relatively cheap, and they can help you out in the long run, especially with a lot more of the fluidity and production side of writing a book. But reading a lot is self-explanatory. You need to understand what kind of writing style you want. For example, you can look at first-person narrative. Like for example, I have here Magnus Chase and the Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan. And also, you're not going to get everything online. So for example, I have a book of mythology here that goes into Greek, Rome, Egypt, Norse, Celtic, Persia, India, and China. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The big thing to take into consideration here is that you're not just using the internet or books that you own. You can use places like a public library, or if you're a student, you can use your college library or your university library. It literally is up to you for this and can help you out in the long run. But other forms of narrative media is an interesting one. Mostly because it depends on who you ask. For example, I'm just going to use Eastern authors here, specifically mangakas Gege Akutami and Tatsuki Fujimoto here. They get a lot of inspiration from Western narrative media such as movies. Specifically, Tatsuki Fujimoto actually used a lot of things like The Raid 2, Day of the Dead, and also many popular devils that are in there are actually inspired by other media. For example, Beam, the Shark Devil, is inspired by Sharknado, which I think is just hilarious. So, it's not just Western authors that can gain inspiration from narrative media here. And now, talking to people, and I have to go in a lot more detail here, purely because the first 3 options, the first one is just how you're going to structure it. And the second 2 aspects are quite literally just secondary research. Talking to people is primary stuff. So that being said, let's talk about that a bit more in depth. Why am I going in depth with primary research? Because primary research is you interacting with your chosen demographic and your target audience. Meaning, that's going to have a lot more of an effect on what you write compared to what you have to research. Doing your primary research first ensures that you have your secondary research correct. So with that, your 2 main aspects of primary research are interviews and surveys. Interviews are you going into what kind of people you want to talk to and just directly talking to them with specific questions. Surveys are a lot more of you taking a sample size of that target audience and then having them answer set questions that you write out. This can be either on paper, Google Forms, or any other kind of service like that. So, for the sake of this, I actually did my own primary research to give you an example here. I did a survey and pretty much asked the questions in relation to genre, character arc, relatability, world, and character flaw. And majority said here, horror genre, negative character arc, they find villains the most relatable, they find that they enjoy the world being corrupt, and the character flaw being a necessary evil. However, there are some other things I can take into consideration here. Because while horror was the most selected, fantasy was very close second. So I can actually meld those into a subgenre of horror fantasy, with horror taking the main spotlight, but still having elements of fantasy within it. But I am going to keep everything else the same, purely because it's a lot more interesting to write about a villain who's the protagonist than a hero who's the protagonist. In my honest opinion. So, with that being said, and now we have somewhat of an understanding of what research is, I hope, let's talk about world building. So, world building, is actually pretty complex, purely because you're building where your story takes place, yes, but you have to include a lot of things, such as landscape, such as major preoccupations and themes, and also what your morality of your world is. I already established that my world's going to be a corrupt world from my primary research, so where would I look? I found online, for my secondary research, I found online to help me with this, the website Masterclass actually has 8 different tips to allow you to do this, and I would like to share these with you because honestly, these came from much more experienced authors than me. That being said, let's just go over what the purpose of world building is before we go over the tips. The purpose of world building is actually simple. It gives your story a landscape. It has to happen in that landscape for your story to be coherent, for it to make sense, and for it to have consistency to it. And with that being said, let's go over world building in depth via Masterclass. They are the following. Tip number 1, when decide where to start, is pretty much saying, how are you going to do it? I've already done it my way, and that way was through just a survey. I already got my world down. They want a corrupt world. So I'll begin by looking into what defines corruption in the world and see what I can apply within discretions. You have listing the rules and laws. Not to be correlated in the same thing. Rules are pretty much how does your world work, and laws are pretty much what people can get away with in terms of like crimes compared to our own real world. So, for example, if you want to go for a real world one, you'll have our world maintaining the same and same laws depending on which country you're in. So if I did that, I would have mostly things from the UK justice system be law, and then also have my world be standard. For this, since I'm going for a fantasy world, I'm going to have fantasy elements into it, but I'm probably going to keep the laws of the world the same, but keeping the laws as something like a tyrannical totalitarian regime, for example. And then establishing the type of world you want basically goes into the first 2 things that I would have discussed, but it's going into them in a lot more detail and explaining your thought process with it. My thought process with going into corrupt world is because it gives people what kind of suspense they want from a horror. They don't know what's going to happen because it's not just horror in a sense of physicality, it's horror in a sense of psychology as well. So pretty much they don't know what's going to happen, it's that psychological suspense. What could happen to them? What could be arrested for? Who can they get killed by? And nobody would know. Those kind of questions, and that kind of horror element. Now, describing the environment. Well, you look outside, and you tell me. If you actually see something like, you're looking at your environment and you look at what countries there are, every single country's environment is going to look different. So, for example, using the UK as an example here, yes, there's a lot more flatlands, especially in places like Lincolnshire and Norfolk, but you go up a bit, there's mountain ranges, there's the Peak District, there's Scotland, filled with highlands and such. Then you also go a bit down south and you have the Dungeness Desert. You also have a bunch of swamps and marshes, mountain path of Exmoor, and also entire lake districts. Those kind of things that can actually use as a baseline for your world. But you can also look at places like Egypt with arid deserts and a lot more minimal grassland. Or you look at America, which has a wide array of different places and different landscapes for it. It basically is up to you what you can pick and choose from like your own real world, or you can establish your own with crystalline forests, mine shafts of infinite wealth. But that's neither here nor there. And then describing your culture is similar, but it's more human. What kind of things do humans celebrate? What kind of things will they do? What kind of traditions will they follow? So, for example, you can look at just using something right in front of me, Norse culture. They have their own set gods that they believe in. They have their set holidays and such, and also they believe in Ragnarok. And dying to them is something that they live for. You can use that as your example. Then you go to describing the language. And yeah, this one's not as simple as like, I speak English. No. You're looking at, especially in something like a fantasy world, you need to look at what each and every race would actually say. So for example, if you're doing Norse, you're going to want to look into Norse runic language. If you're doing Irish, you want to look into Gaelic language. You're doing Welsh, you got to look into Welsh language. Doing anything, you got to look into the specific language that it's from. That means you have to do a lot more than just, here's my language, here it is in the book. It's pretty much you're typing up what your characters are reading out, be it in their thoughts or out loud. And then history is describing how your world came to be. It's a lot more subtle in the sense that you're describing how your world got to where it is now, and you're describing how your world can change depending on that history. And then, lastly, the final tip, using existing worlds as your inspiration. So, for example here, horror. I can look into Steven Spielberg's The Dark Tower universe, so things like It, The Dark Tower, or etc, etc. Or I can look into H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror, the Call of Cthulhu, for example, or anything along those lines, and especially the Necronomicon. Or I can look into the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse books. I have those. I have that power to do so. And it doesn't even have to stop at my own collection. I can still go to the libraries and such. This is going back to your research, and this helps you with that. Next section, genre. Genre's kind of a big one purely because you need it, and you need to establish it before you even pitch your story. So let's answer some questions, shall we? Question 1. Why does genre exist? Simple. You need it to be able to find all forms of fictional books and define them through a specific means. This is where the genre comes in. Second question. Why is genre so important? That's also simple. Helps us as readers find the book that we enjoy the most. But do take some caution with it. This is daunting because every genre there are basically an infinite amount of subgenres. So for example, I already have done a subgenre here. Horror fantasy is a subgenre in itself combining two main genres. And pretty much the wider audience you get, the lot more niche you're actually going to end up becoming. So it's actually much more recommended for newbie authors to not delve into that and more just go for single genres, for example, or something simple like I'm doing. That being said, what is important with genres, and I say you need to establish it before you pitch your story. So let's speak hypothetical here. You have your agent or your publisher, and you have to pitch an idea to them, so they can actually get that out there. You need that So they'll be able to market your book to the target audience that you want, fans of that genre. If you don't do that, your story's going to end up being confused and it may not even be accepted. Simply put, I have horror fantasy prioritizing horror. And secondly, I need a support network. With that subgenre, horror fantasy, I have that support network accessible to me purely because you're going to be able to find people who will help proofread and beta read your project, because you're not going to be able to figure out what's good for yours. So let's just say what I think will not be the same as another person's. This is purely because my mind, my brain, and how it works is different to yours. So, therefore, I'm not going to be able to pick up on some things that I write that may make no sense, may make little sense, may be inconsistent, or may be more relevant later. That other person will help me. And I just dropped my pen on the floor. So, with that being said, why also do you need to promote something is because you need to be able to stand out from your competition. You don't want to go into it thinking that, oh, I'm going to be the next Harry Potter. Not because Harry Potter is actually a bad story, but purely because something like that is very unrealistic. It's unrealistic standards to you, it's unrealistic standards to people, and it's unrealistic standards in the industry. So keep that in mind, especially when it comes down to trying to replicate someone else's gravitas. The story that you're actually writing may not be all that good, or it may not be as popular as you would like. Also, a bit of a random one, book cover art is also important here. You kind of want your genre and your story to match your book cover, because contrary to don't judge a book by its cover, people are going to judge a book by its cover. It's gonna happen. It's happened to everyone. People look at a person and just think, that person ain't right. I might be wrong, but first impressions, that person may not be right. It's something that even if you deny you do. Believe me, I would know. But you want your story to actually correlate with your front cover so people actually are drawn to it better. That helps you in the long run, and that can also help you out with other things, including your overall style of a book that you want to write. I believe that's everything for genre, so next should be tone and atmosphere. Hey, Editing Dino here, and I really should just say, this is the absolute worst part of the audio, where my stuttering is just the absolute worst. Talking for some reason is just an enemy to me. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to read it out from the audio, and I'm just going to match it into the video later. Okay? Thank you. So, behind me now is a quote that portrays a specific tone and a specific atmosphere. I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to read it out to you, and you can read it on the board here if you can. Sorry if you can't, my handwriting isn't the best. And with that being said, allow me to read this out. There she was, dressed in pink, her eyes gleaming maliciously as she turned to smile at me. Dread crawled across my skin at her gesture. I couldn't run away. Now she'd actually see me. All I could do was wait and watch as she made her way over to me through the busy hall. Right, so, this quote here, as I just read, is very filled with dread, fear, and uncertainty. The girl in pink is portraying this passage as a bully, and the narrator in this situation is the victim. So we're looking at the victim's point of view here, and we're thinking highly negatively of the girl in pink. But what happens when it's reworded? So, as you can see now on the board, it actually says something quite different. This one reads as follows. There she was, dressed in pink, her eyes gleaming happily when she turned to smile at me. I couldn't just walk away, I hadn't even gotten a chance to talk to her yet. Before I could figure out how to push through the busy hall to get to her, she was already making her way to me. So I just stayed where I was and hoped she really had received good news. Now we have much more of a happier tone. She's expecting good news. Hell yes! Everybody loves good news. It's portraying the narrator and the girl in pink as friends. This passage, instead of viewing the girl as this bully and in a negative light, this one's being portrayed in a much more positive light. So that actually helps you in a lot of ways to determine how your tone and atmosphere can be different depending on your time and place in the book, or just how you word something. So the difference between that quote and this one is the description behind it. The description used for this is a lot more different to the one when used beforehand, purely because it's using a lot more positive description instead of negative description here. As an author, with something that's presented, that's how your tone can help. Atmosphere is a lot more harder to pin down, in my opinion, specifically trying to create an atmosphere that is immersive in a book. What I mean by that, let's look at somebody with much more success than me. Mr. J.R.R. Tolkien. So, let's start with the first one. And this quote reads,
There are rockets like a flight of scintillating birds singing with sweet voices. There are green trees with trunks of dark smoke, their leaves opened like a whole spring, unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped like glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with the sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces.
Oh. Very uplifting. Tolkien's making the scene feel loving in a way. Loving, sweet, exciting, and it's atmospherically emotional in the setting. And it creates a positive and happy mood for it. It's like I'm one of the hobbits that's actually at Bilbo Baggins' party at the minute, but that's something that changes when you look at something that you did in the Two Towers. And that quote reads as,
It was now past midnight. The sky was utterly dark, and the stillness of the heavy air foreboded storm. Suddenly the clouds were seared by a blinding flash. Branched lightning smote down upon the eastward hills. For a staring moment, the watchers on the wall saw that all the space between them, and the dike lit with white light. It was boiling and crawling with dark shapes, some squat and broad, others tall and grim, with high helms and sable shields.
This is a very unique description. From what? Well, Bilbo's party was a fun and exciting atmosphere, using words like sweet, spring, and shining. The Battle of Helm's Deep, where that quote is from, is much more foreboding and dark, using words like heavy, boiling, and grim. How'd he do it? How did J.R.R. Tolkien create two different atmospheres in one story? Well, the trick is, you can read it, right? He used different words to create different atmospheres, specifically words that hold connotative meanings. To connote is to signify and suggest different meanings and ideas in addition to your primary meanings, and ideas which are at the forefront. Using words with connotative meanings will help us describe a setting and implied feelings that are commonly attached to those words. This can help us to create a rich and emotional atmosphere while simultaneously describing physical aspects of the scenery. Now for the next part, I'm going over something that's actually kind of something that helps you with tone. Your story themes. So first up, what are story themes? Well, to put it simply here, they are central to all forms of narrative. They are your underlying messages in your story, and how the story is conveyed. Basically, what it is that story themes are the backbone of all narratives of a story. And this theme can also sew two narratives together and interlock them. So, what kind of examples can we have here? So, three most common story themes. These being survival, good versus evil, and love and sacrifice. Starting with survival, since this for me is probably going to be my best one, using what I'm doing for the sake of this video. Since I'm doing horror, survival will actually play a huge role in that, purely because most horror-based media are people running away and trying to survive against a specific thing. Doesn't need to be a monster, it can actually be another person. It doesn't even have to be a souped up serial killer like Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. It could just be a blind veteran who just knows his stuff. Next up, good versus evil. Kind of a self-explanatory thing here. Good versus evil is a big one, mostly because of how it's the most common structure in storycraft, because you're always going to have a good guy trying to stop a bad guy. But it doesn't mean that the hero has to be the protagonist, or the villain has to be the antagonist. You can have a little switch, but either way, it can have it be that the hero prevails, or the villain prevails, and the story continues. And lastly, love and sacrifice was probably the hardest one to pin down, because love is a very broad concept, and also, it can actually be defined as love in terms of familial, love is in like romantic, love is in sexual. It doesn't matter, there's a lot to it. It's pretty much what you're gonna do when it comes down to like, you're building up your story like it's a house. Your story structure is your foundation of the house, and that's basically a framework for it. Think of it like that, but there are multiple ways to it. I recommend 4 personally. These being the classical structure, the hero's journey, the 3-act structure, and the 7-point structure. Starting off with the classical structure here, it's when it's split into 7 parts of the story. These being the exposition, devising action, the climax, the falling action, the denouement, spelt D-X-N-E-N-O-U-E-M-E-N-T. I genuinely don't know how to actually say that properly. And themes. The hero's journey is split into 3 different stages of the departure, initiation, and the return. So basically, with the hero's journey in particular, think of it like your ancient Greek stories, your tales of Heracles, for example. And then you have the 3-act structure, different from the hero's journey. It's still in 3 different stages, but these being the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. So think of it like Harry Potter is split into 7 stages. The first 4 are your setup. Books 5 and 6 are your confrontation, with a little bit of 7 in there, and at the end of 7 is the resolution. The 7-point structure is more detailed than the 3-act structure, having the hook, setup, catalyst, debate, breaking to 2, confrontation, and a resolution. So literally, take what I just said about Harry Potter, and just have every single book fit into that. And if you ask me, the easiest one to do are the hero's journey and the 3-act structure. Mostly because it's really easy to do a story about a specific person going on a journey in that kind of regard. But also, 3-act structure is used in other forms of media such as short movies and movies in general. So having that extra knowledge will help you in the long run. And now for something a bit more complex, the magic system. This is also an optional one, so if you want to skip it, feel free. Magic system is a lot more fun than it actually may seem, mostly because there's actually 2 different types of it, but let's go over some of the basic things here. So first up, what is a magic system? Magic systems are the rules and abilities and the restrictions that powers will have during your story. You don't actually have to have magic in your story to actually make it work. Magic system is an umbrella term. It could also be referred to as power system, but either way, there are 3 components to it. When can your spells be casted? What are needed for those spells? And how strong is your spell? an example of like some powers that you can say is like Superman having a lot of powers. So, due to him having solar radiation, he can have heat vision, freezing breath, sight, super speed, super strength, and flight. But the most terrifying power that he has is that he knows how to use Twitter. Yeah, anyway, let's talk about the two different types of magic system real quick before I actually make any more jokes like that. So, yeah, as I said, there are two different types of magic systems that you can have. You can have your soft magic system, or you can have your hard magic system. Now, what are the differences here? Well, a hard magic system is a system that is defined, your rules are concrete, and your limitations and restrictions are clear. It's actually used regularly in your world, so think, for example, the Grimoires of Black Clover are a hard magic system because they are actually well defined, they are limited by the number of pages in your grimoire and what they can do and their size, and also they are limited in what they can do because they are set to that specific magic. So for example, Yuno can only use his grimoire, and Asta can only use his, and they can't just swap them around to be able to use them. So Yuno can use Asta's anti-magic, and Asta can't use Yuno's Divine Wind magic. As for the soft magic system, the rules are less clear, and there's not really much sense to it. The magic in the soft magic system is actually used to instill wonder and amazement, and is not used to solve problems directly. So you can think of this like how magic is used in Lord of the Rings, with everything that happens, such as the famous "you have no power here" scene. Now, I just want to say this. Just because a soft magic system has those set things where they're not used and set in clear rules or sense, it does not mean you make your story have a soft magic system. Because oftentimes, a soft magic system can actually end up being much lazier than a hard magic system. An example of this is the worst book I've personally ever read, Reaper's Creek, had a soft magic system, where it's defined as universe coding? Trust me, it makes less sense the more I talk about it here. And it pretty much can be described as hogwash in a sense, and just trying to make him look like a god in the most simple way possible. And also, it just made the book overall terrible and boring. That's at least that book's concerns. Don't read it. But along with that, a hard magic system can actually be much more easier for you, because you can use, for example, Percy Jackson has what can be described as a hard magic system, because they have the magic of the gods on their side. Prophecy is clearly limited by only one person can actually appear the prophecy. Nobody can go to the oracle at any given time, and they can only be appeared when there's actually a massive prophecy in play. So, when it comes down to that, so for example, Percy can only go to the oracle when his name is actually referenced a lot. Zoe can only speak to the oracle because she's a hunter of Artemis. Clarice could only go to the oracle because the quest needed her, and Annabeth needed to go to the oracle because the quest needed her specifically. However, there is also cases where demigod powers also have specific set to them depending on who their godly parent is. So Percy's magic revolves around hydrokinesis, hydrogenesis, and also zoolingualism, and also potentially mist travel and cryokinesis. That's all set to Percy purely because he's a son of Poseidon. Meg McCaffrey from the Trials of Apollo series has magic involving flora. Pretty much she can control plant life and travel through it. But an actual skilled author can actually make a soft magic system look like a hard magic system and have it revolve around it, but keeping the magic hidden in plain sight, for example. So I think you can have things like the Mist in the Rhinoverse, or just having magic be only used by specific people and be hidden away from the world of mere muggles and no mages. Now for the final segment, character. And this is a doozy. Character is actually relatively simple in the long run about it, mostly because your characters are needed so you can actually have your help them tell the story. So let's talk about how you go about creating your character, and then also why your character needs to grow and why that is important. So effectively, character creation is the more simple of the two, mostly because of your character can be created from anything. So take for example, Magnus Chase here, the main character of the Magnus Chase series, was created as a reference to a Norse hero. Most of the Raidenverse is actually made in reference to heroes from a specific myth. Percy is a portmanteau for Heracles, Stanley the Beauregard is actually a portmanteau for Achilles. There's a lot to it. And also in turn, those characters are created with the prefix of Rick using students as his reference. When I was doing Ignoble Beyond the Veil, I made my character out of inspiration for Hollow Stars Japan's Generation 3 Origami Ogre, and then I also had his surname be Edmund, in reference to Edmond Dante, the protagonist of The Count of Monte Cristo. Now, character growth. This is where a lot of people tend to forget something. If your characters don't grow, you're not gonna get a takeaway from that story. You're gonna have a nothing story. And this is where a lot of the popular stuff kind of falls flat in certain regards. Like, Percy changes at the end of at the Olympians, mostly because Percy develops, like, understanding that his favorite Greek hero wasn't a good person, to accepting that things needed to change, so he said, hey, change it. He changed the status quo. A character like Harry Potter doesn't do that. Literally everything with Harry Potter is effectively one big nothing burger. The status quo is perpetuated, Harry becomes a cop, but Hermione becomes a shit prime minister, and the list goes on. Literally the only three characters to get any kind of character development in Harry Potter are Dudley Dursley, Draco Malfoy, and Severus Snape. Dudley's is don't be an idiot and don't be a bully, and Malfoy and Snape's is literally to not be a
World War II German soldier.
But I digress. Your character needs to be able to grow and needs to be able to learn. Thus, you need to have your character be adverse, faced with adversity, faced with multiple obstacles to get to an end goal. That end goal is important because your character needs to actually be fully engrossed in that end goal. Otherwise, your character is not going to have any reasons. So, secondly, face an obstacle, I give up. But it's like you gotta keep in consideration that your character needs to be able to have that one-track mind. So, for example, Frieren from Frieren Beyond Journey's End has the one-track mind of wanting to acquire multiple magic. That goal ultimately changes after the death of her friend Himmel, because she ultimately learns that she also wants to learn the value of human life as well. She still has that one-track mind of wanting to learn all kinds of magic, but she also has the one-track mind of, I want to be able to get to know humans because human life is so fleeting. Another character that I like personally is Dante from Devil May Cry. He has this one-track mind for vengeance, not because he wants more power from it, but purely because he wants to find his mother's killer. Yes, he's perpetuating the cycle of vengeance, but he's still doing a lot for it. So, with that in consideration, what else can I mention? Well, I haven't mentioned things like representation. Mostly because specifically, most books can actually be a good course of representation for your stories. Many actually tend to use in reference to the American Civil Rights Movement, for example, or Pride. And many more tend to express individuality. So, ultimately, the one thing I have to say when it comes down to characters is make sure that every single character has some kind of purpose. It's not saying like have a checkbox and say, okay, there's my gay character, there's my black character, there's my Asian. No, that's not how you do it. The way you do it is that you have reasons for those characters to be there. You have reasons for why they want to change the status quo of the world. That's how you get characters that are good representation for ethics and good representation for sexuality. They're not textbooks, they're legit people that people can relate to. I think that's literally everything I can mention. Mentioning because if I check the script, yeah, that's literally everything on the script. As said, I'll probably have links somewhere. I don't know where yet, but they'll be there. And yeah, thanks.